Well, would you look at that? Yup, that's Qin Yong, the unfortunate soul who got transported to an alternative world and reincarnated as an iron-skinned pupa. I mean, talk about a rough day, am I right? You might be wondering how on earth he ended up in this sticky, or should I say, scaly, situation. The classic tale of Qin Yong, the high school student who challenged the hottest girl in the school to a duel. The poor guy challenged her to a duel a whopping 99 times. That's dedication right there, folks. But alas, he never seemed to come out on top, whether it was running, academics, or even art. Ouch. One fateful day, the hot girl finally turned around and asked Qin Yong why is he so persistent, but Qin Yong surprised her with a sassy comeback. Sure, she may be drop-dead gorgeous, a sports superstar, a brainiac, and a creative genius, but does that mean she's perfect? No way. As the sun beat down on the school's track and field, out of nowhere, Qin Yong grabbed Chen Mo's hand and made a bold promise: he would do anything she wanted if she emerged victorious. With a coy smile, she whispered something inaudible, asking Qin Yong to be her boyfriend, but alas, Qin Yong was too focused on his stretches and didn't quite hear what she said, but, as luck would have it, Qin Yong's confidence is no match for Chen Mo's lightning speed. He's left in the dust as she sprints ahead, leaving him in a heap on the ground while she basks in the glory of her victory. As she's surrounded by cheering students, Chen Mo takes pity on comes over to check on him. But before she can even finish her sentence, about inviting Qin Yong on a date, Qin Yong was already planning his revenge. He's determined to challenge her again and again, for all of eternity if necessary, until he finally comes out on top. Qin Yong is running track with Chen Mo, and the next thing he knows, the ground is opening up beneath him like something out of a sci-fi movie. It's a full-on earthquake, and it's not looking good. As it turns out, Qin Yong has been given a second chance at life by none other than the dimensional god herself. Apparently, there's a god in charge of managing different dimensions, and she's taken pity on Qin Yong and his fallen classmates, knowing Chen Mo and his classmates have already reincarnated into the alternative world. Of course, Qin Yong being Qin Yong, he's not content to just come back to life and live an ordinary existence. Oh no. He's determined to be the strongest, the best, and the most powerful. Qin Yong asked the dimensional god for the strongest ability, no matter the consequences. The dimensional god was about to caution Qin Yong about the potential downside, but it was too late. The impetuous youngster was already bouncing with excitement, begging to be transported to this new world. In his mind, Qin Yong was already planning his ascent to the top, determined to surpass even Chen Mo and become the strongest being in this new life. With a flick of his wrist, the dimensional god sent Qin Yong hurtling through the multiverse. The young man's body was flung through time and space, he landed heavily on the ground, and amidst the dust, he reincarnated as an iron-skinned pupa. But hey, at least he got a six-pack. Looks like Qin Yong might have lucked out after all. Even though he's now a tiny little iron-skinned pupa, he's got the ultimate merging system on his side. Not only does it have infinite growth potential, but it also lets tiny pupa devour anything and everything he comes across to get stronger. And the best part? Once he's strong enough, he can return back to his human form. But tiny pupa is nothing if determined. He's not going to let a little thing like being a pupa hold him back. Thinking about his next plan. It looks like tiny pupa is in a problem. Not only is he tiny and stuck in a pupa, but he's also managed to trap himself in a deep hole. And let's not forget the fact that he's basically armless and legless, which doesn't exactly make for the best escape plan. So there he is, just circling around like a helpless little creature. To make matters worse, it's eerily quiet in this new world. No birds chirping, no leaves rustling, nothing. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, a group of bunnies sprang from the bushes. Tiny Pupa thought he was in the clear when he saw them, but then he noticed their sinister grins and razor-sharp teeth splitting its mouth. These weren't your average cuddly rabbits. Before he had time to catch his breath, the bunnies charged towards him and dove into the hole. Tiny Pupa's survival instincts kicked in a moment of pure desperation. He recalled his gym training and busted out some sit-ups that would make Arnold proud. With a Herculean effort, he sprang up and narrowly escaped the attack. Tiny Pupa leaped out of the hole and started bouncing and spinning around, escaping into the forest. Tiny Pupa was cruising down the forest, feeling the wind in his hair and the sun on his face. He was having the time of his life until he realized something was terribly wrong. He couldn't slow down. Suddenly, a creature descended from the sky. It was a massive serpent with wings. Tiny Pupa's heart was pounding as he narrowly dodged the beast's razor-sharp teeth. Just when he thought he was in the clear, he found himself in a swampy quagmire, where he was ambushed by hungry crocodiles. The scaly beast lunged at him with jaws wide open, but Tiny Pupa's quick reflexes saved him from becoming a reptilian snack. But his troubles were far from over. In his panicked flight, Tiny Pupa found himself stuck in a tree trunk. Tears streamed down his face, as he stumped upon a group of bunnies. As the bunnies closed in on him, he frantically begged for mercy, hoping that they would spare him. Opened his mouth and shouted desperately. But to his shock and horror, one of the bunnies leaped right into his mouth. The system then informed that Tiny Pupa had just devoured a yellow rank level 3 hopping bunny. The remaining bunnies took one look at their fallen comrade and hightailed it out of there as they'd just seen the devil himself. The system beeped and whirred as Tiny Pupa waited anxiously for the results of his render. Finally, it chimed in with the news he had been waiting for. He had gained a new ability. And not just any ability, but the hopping ability. Tiny Pupa could hardly contain his excitement as he hopped out of the tree and onto the forest floor. For the first time, he was able to stand on his own too, well, whatever you want to call them. He felt a sudden courage with newfound powers. And he couldn't resist testing them out. With a sly grin, Tiny Pupa charged deeper into the forest, looking for his next victim. He didn't have to wait long before he came across a 2-headed snake. Tiny Pupa pounced on it like a cat on a mouse, sinking his teeth into the scaly flesh. But to his dismay, he couldn't seem to devour the creature no matter how hard he tried. Frustrated, he moved on to a 4-armed bear but had no luck there either. Even a blade-back boar proved too tough for him to handle. The system chimed in with a helpful reminder: Tiny Pupa could only devour creatures weaker than himself, or ones that had already been defeated. Tiny Pupa barely had time to catch his breath before the 4-armed bear came barreling towards him, its eyes filled with rage and hunger. The little pupa knew he had to act fast if he wanted to avoid being the bear's next meal. With the bear hot on his heels, Tiny Pupa hopped through the forest as fast as he could, his heart pounding in his chest. Just when he thought he was done for, Tiny Pupa spotted a cave in the distance. Without a second thought, he hopped inside and ducked behind a nearby rock. The bear charged past him, snarling and snapping its jaws, but it couldn't reach Tiny Pupa's hiding spot. As he caught his breath, Tiny Pupa realized something strange: the ground beneath him was hot, almost like it was on fire. He cautiously lifted his head and peered around the cave, and that's when he saw it, a majestic Kirin, its hooves chained and its eyes blazing with anger. Tiny Pupa started to hop away, but the Kirin spoke up, demanding that he stop. Surprised, Tiny Pupa turned around to face the creature. To his amazement, Kirin claimed that fate had brought them together, and it was willing to offer Tiny Pupa a big fortune. Tiny Pupa's face contorted with disgust as he looked at the Kirin. Thinking to himself that Kirin was trying to pull some sort of scam, the Kirin assured Tiny Pupa that it was a majestic beast and wouldn't lie to a mere pupa. Yeah, right. But then the Kirin dropped a bombshell: there was a secret room behind them, and a treasure hidden inside. Tiny Pupa's eyes widened with excitement as he hopped his way into the secret room. Lo and behold, a shiny crystal ball was sitting there, just waiting to be taken. The Kirin urged Tiny Pupa to devour it, promising that it would help him level up dramatically. Seeing the implausible energy emitting from the ball, Tiny Pupa didn't even have to think twice. He opened his mouth wide and lunged toward the crystal ball like it was the last dumpling on the plate at a dim sum restaurant. Meanwhile, in the Spirit Beast Gate, chaos erupted as a crystal ball cracked and shattered. It was like a disco ball gone rogue. Unfortunately, the explosion also backfired on a poor girl who was sitting nearby, causing her to spew blood like a fountain. The ministers were freaking out, not knowing what to do about her injuries, so they referred to her as Your Majesty the Queen. Wait, hold up, she looked familiar. She stated that the beast trap altar had been breached. When news of Kiran's escape reached the spirit beast gate, everyone was freaking out. They knew that if that majestic beast got out into the world, it would bring chaos and destruction. But there was one girl who refused to be intimidated. She claimed that if she could catch the Kiran once, she could do it again. "You go, girl." With a confident swagger, she stood up and ordered the ministers to follow her to the beast trap altar. Little did she know that a purple-haired girl was sneering at her from the sidelines, muttering that they wouldn't make it back alive. Drama alert. The group dashed into the forest, but they didn't get very far before a dagger came flying toward them. One of the ministers managed to block it, but they demanded to know who dared to attack the spirit beast gate. The silence was deafening. Things just got real. Out of nowhere, a white tiger appeared, and before anyone could even process what was happening, it chomped down on the poor defenseless minister like he was a Big Mac. Suddenly, a mysterious woman stepped out of the shadows, and she was not impressed with the spirit beast gate's reputation. She sneered and ridiculed their strength. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the woman ordered her tiger to attack the group. But one of the ministers had a keen sense of the unusual aura surrounding the woman. He didn't hesitate for a second. He summoned his contract beast, a howling silver wolf, to fight back. He bravely decided to stay behind and cover their backs. As the group arrived at the cave, they could feel that something was off. It was like the air was charged with energy. They soon realized that the seal had been breached. Before they could even process what was happening, the girl in charge strutted her way into the cave like she owned the place. After chowing down on the ball, he started to feel like something was off. Why would Kiran let him eat something so valuable? Suddenly, a light bulb went off in his head. He realized that the crystal ball must have been what was sealing the Kiran all along. And then, things got even more interesting. Tiny Pupa had a stroke of genius and asked the system if he could devour creatures that were stronger than him, but only during their defenseless stage. And you know what? To his surprise, the system said yes. Knowing that he could devour the majestical beast, it looks like Tiny Pupa has a new favorite dish, Kiran steak. Despite the Kiran's initial sneer of disdain, Tiny Pupa fearlessly lunged onto the majestic beast and chomped down on its scales like they were potato chips. Kiran's expression quickly changed from one of arrogance to one of fear as Tiny Pupa activated his devouring skill. With a mighty bite, Tiny Pupa tore Kiran's body and soul apart, causing the beast to roar in agony. But, just when Tiny Pupa was about to revel in his newfound power, the system had some bad news. The Kiran was too powerful to be digested. Tiny Pupa tumbled around like a giant meatball, throwing a tantrum like a toddler who had been denied candy. But suddenly, a light bulb lit up in his head, and he realized that exercise might actually be the answer to his digestive issues. He shot off like a rocket, running around the cave like a madman. But after a minute of running, he collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath like a fish out of water. The system popped up with some bad news. Exercise doesn't help with digestion, no matter how hard you huff and puff. The only way to digest a higher-level creature is to stuff your face with even more creatures, pieces of equipment, or treasuries. The Tiny Pupa grumbled and grunted, cursing the system for not telling him everything he needed to know. But the system had a quick comeback. "You never asked, buddy." Out of nowhere, the puny pupa began to levitate in mid-air, its body pulsing with the mystical energy of the Kiran. It was about to burst with excitement when a sudden pull sucked it toward the cave entrance. There, the pupa saw a girl chanting some ancient contract with funky symbols floating around her. The ministers were thrilled to finally capture the majestic Kiran, and they cheered as the girl's energy clashed with the creature's. But when the dust settled, they were shocked to discover that instead of the mighty Kiran, all they had captured was a tiny and confused pupa. Just as the pupa was trying to wrap its tiny brain around what was going on, the system popped up like an annoying pop-up ad, announcing that the contract had been signed and the pupa was now the queen's one and only exclusive spirit creature. The girl holding the pupa looked confused as heck, but the pupa wasn't having it. It squirmed and wriggled like a noodle, protesting against the idea of being anyone's personal spirit creature. But then, out of nowhere, a stunning face appeared before him, looking suspiciously like Chinamo. The pupa was so distracted by the beauty that it didn't even notice when the queen suddenly snatched it up and held it upside down and had a clear look of despise. The queen suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, collapsing to the ground with one knee. One of the ministers rushed over to check on her, but the other minister held him back, looking at the tiny pupa with disdain. Realizing that the queen had contracted with a trashy creature, the ministers knew that she was no longer valuable to the spirit beast gate. They had another queen candidate in mind. They ordered the girl to return all of her equipment and treasures, and she had no choice but to comply. The poor pupa watched in horror as the girl stripped off her gear and handed it over to the ministers. The pupa found the chance and slowly walked away from the cave. Whoa, hold up. The system's back, it's like that clingy ex who just won't quit. But this time, the system brought bad news. The owner can summon their spirit creature whenever they want, and once the owner dies, the spirit creature will also die. Before our tiny pupa could even contemplate the consequences, a freaking white tiger jumps out of nowhere and starts snacking on some unlucky souls. Meanwhile, a tiny pupa is getting stepped on and ignored. He protested against the mistreatment, and the woman was surprised to see a talking pupa. As she lifted the tiny pupa off the ground, she saw the contract and started ridiculing the young girl. The young girl was embarrassed and challenged the woman to a duel, but with her injured body, she was no match for the woman. Our tiny pupa jumps into action like a miniature superhero, trying to protect the young girl from the whips. But alas, the odds were not in their favor. Before they knew it, the young girl was lying on the ground, motionless and breathless. The woman rewards her tiger by letting it feast. Suddenly, tiny pupa sensed a bright light flashing before his eyes. To his surprise, a shadowy figure popped up in that dazzling light. It was no other than Chenmo's soul. The soul slowly merged into the young girl's body. Meanwhile, that ferocious white tiger was still gnawing away like it was snack time, but then out of nowhere, a mysterious hand clamped down on its jaw like a vice grip. And before anyone could react, that tiger was flung 10 meters away like a rag doll. Who could have that kind of superhuman strength? Who could have that kind of overwhelming aura? None other than the one and only Chenmo. Our tiny pupa could hardly believe his beady little eyes. Whoa, did you see that? That white tiger went down harder than a sack of potatoes. It was flailing around like a helpless kitten, trying to get back on its feet. And the woman? She was absolutely stunned. She couldn't believe that the young girl just tossed her spirit creature around like a rag doll just with her bare hands. Our tiny pupa was bouncing around like a ping-pong ball, calling Chenmo's name repeatedly, trying to get her attention. He is now 100% sure this is Chenmo. The pupa launched himself at Chenmo's chest, squealing with joy, revealing that he is Qin Yong. But wait a minute. Chenmo was confused. She is holding on to an unusually large pupa in her hands, and claimed to be Qin Yong. Chenmo is blushing like a schoolgirl as the pupa tells her how happy he is to see Chenmo again. But Chenmo is not buying it. This must all be some weird dream. How can her beloved Qin Yong turn into a giant pupa? Things are getting crazy here. The woman charged at Chenmo with her whips like she was some kind of cowboy. But our girls got some serious skills and dodged those whips like it was no big deal. The woman couldn't believe it. How did this young girl get so strong all of a sudden? Tiny pupa is just being held upside down watching all of this in amazement. He's impressed by Chenmo's power, but he's also getting pretty dizzy from being held upside down for so long. Chenmo is holding the pupa and trying to make sense of all of this. According to Tiny Pupa, the woman is here to kill her and Chenmo is some kind of big shot in a guild or a clan. They're in a very bad situation and need to find a way to escape. Chenmo can't believe what she's hearing. She must be dreaming, right? But even in her dreams, she's not going to lose to anyone. With a serious gaze that could scare off a grizzly bear, Chenmo was ready to kick some serious butts. The poor tiger finally managed to get on its paws after stumbling around like a drunken sailor. The woman flexed her abilities and enhanced her white tiger's power with blazing lightning surrounding the big kitty. The tiger dashed toward Chenmo, with bolts of lightning striking the ground like Thor's hammer, creating massive dents on the ground. Chenmo held her tiny pupa tightly in her arms as she dodged all of the attacks like a ninja. Tiny Pupa, feeling useless, questioned the system if he had any ability that could help. The system replied that he had another skill called Armor Fusion, which would allow him to become a suit of armor for his owner. The white tiger managed to trap the two in a corner and unleashed a powerful energy toward them that shook the entire cave. Suddenly, amid the dust, an armored arm appeared, holding tightly onto a ball of energy. It was none other than Tiny Pupa, who had transformed into a badass armed guard and fused onto Chenmo. The woman was undeterred, and her tiger looked more eager to fight than a toddler in a ball pit. They launched another attack, and the two went back and forth like a heated game of ping-pong. But Chenmo was not one to mess with. She seized the opening and punched the tiger's belly with the force of a sledgehammer. The impact was enough to shatter the tiger's spine and send it flying like a furry projectile. Tiny Pupa looked at Chenmo in amazement, thinking to himself, this is the person who won the National Karate Black Belt Championship. I gotta step up my game. The connection between the tiger and the woman was broken, and the woman uncontrollably gushed out some blood. She couldn't believe what was happening as Chenmo slowly walked towards her like a boss. But the woman wasn't going down without a fight. She threw a flashbang grenade and vanished into thin air. I'll be back for revenge, she shouted from the shadows. Tiny Pupa returned to his regular form, feeling a bit miffed that the woman had managed to escape their clutches. Chenmo looked at the little creature and asked if he was really Qin Yong. Tiny Pupa reassured her that he was indeed Qin Yong and that they had been reincarnated into an alternative world by the dimensional god. Chenmo recalled their meeting with the dimensional god where she had asked to unite with Qin Yong. She smiled and nodded, feeling relieved that she wasn't just talking to herself all this time. Suddenly, Tiny Pupa switched his tone and started talking big game. You know, Chenmo, even though I'm just a lowly pupa and your spirit creature, one day, after I devour enough creatures, I'll surpass you. Chenmo burst into joyful laughter. She held tightly onto the little guy, feeling grateful to have him by her side. Tiny Pupa protested being held so tightly on Chenmo's chest. Hey, Chenmo, give me some breathing room, will ya? But the moment of joy was cut short when Chenmo suddenly gushed out a throatful of blood and collapsed on the ground. Tiny Pupa was extremely worried, knowing that it must have been from the earlier fight. The system then reminded Tiny Pupa that devouring the white tiger could grant him a new ability. Tiny Pupa quickly hopped over to the corpse and started chowing down. As he began digesting the tiger, his stats increased quite a bit, and he was granted the skill, White Tiger Blood Energy, which allowed him to heal wounds quicker. Tiny Pupa scratched his head, wondering how he could use his new, White Tiger Blood Energy, ability to heal Chenmo's wounds. Just as he was about to ask the system for help, he noticed that the system seemed to be blushing. Hey, system, why are you blushing? Asked Tiny Pupa, confused. The system stuttered, well, it's just that, the thing is, the skill can only be used on you, Tiny Pupa. If you want to apply it to another person, they have to be in contact with your saliva or blood. Tiny Pupa's eyes widened in disbelief. This gave Tiny Pupa no choice but to start helping Chenmo heal her wounds. Chenmo was grateful for Tiny Pupa's help in healing her wounds. She said with a smile. Tiny Pupa replied with a giant red palm-sized mark on his face and said it was no big deal. The news of the fallen queen shook the spirit beast gate to its core. Disciples were running around frantically like headless chickens until a woman stepped forward, announcing that she would be the new queen.